Warning: due to the nature of light gun games, the following contains several screen flashes. Viewer discretion is advised.
Introducing the new Atari XE video game system that also comes with a target gun, the only one that has it all.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Player One Start. Today we're going to talk about the Atari light gun that came out for the Atari XE Game System and the Atari 7800. Let's go ahead and take a look at some of the history and the development of this device, and we'll see what happened. When the Atari 7800 was initially released, it did not have a light gun accessory, making it the only console of the era not to have one at launch. In 1987, Atari released the XE-GS, which came bundled with the XG-1 light gun. The XE-GS is essentially an Atari 65 XE computer redesigned cosmetically to give the appearance of a game console. As this accessory was sold almost exclusively bundled with the game system, it was actually very hard to find this accessory on its own. However, it is compatible with the Atari 7800 video game console. And since the Atari 7800 is backwards compatible, the XG-1 also works on the Atari 2600. Atari eventually released 5 games that use the light gun: Alien Brigade, Barnyard Blaster, Crossbow, Meltdown, and Sentinel. I do happen to own all of these games except for Sentinel, which is extremely hard to find. There were almost just as many games released that were supported on the Atari XE-GS. When compared to other light guns of the era, the XG-1 is actually designed a little bit differently. It is essentially a specialized light pen. It was designed this way as light pen support was built into the earliest Atari computers, but never really caught on. In fact, all light gun games for the XE-GS could be played with a light pen, and you could potentially play all light pen games with the XG-1 instead. However, this design would have some drawbacks, as it is not as accurate as its Nintendo and Sega counterparts. For example, on the Atari XE-GS, due to the way that both Bug Hunt and Barnyard Blaster were coded, there is a different offset on each of those games that the light gun cannot compensate for, even with calibration. Let's take a look at how this would work. The way a typical light gun is designed is it is designed to have a lens that focuses the light from the screen onto the sensor of the light gun. That way, with almost pixel-perfect accuracy, it can sense, when you pulled the trigger, what was being drawn on the screen at that exact time. If the light gun sensed any light from the CRT television, it knew that you hit an enemy, and it knew where on the screen that enemy was, and it would show the death of the enemy. If the light gun didn't sense any light, it would record a miss. All of this happens extremely fast, as a normal CRT television, at least here in the United States, draws the screen 60 times a second. Light pens were designed essentially the same way and work about the same, but there are some minor differences which cause some headaches when trying to use it as a light gun. For example, in the game Bug Hunt, there is a hard-coded offset that is in its programming language that is completely different from the hard-coded offset from Barnyard Blaster. This caused players to notice that Barnyard Blaster seems to shoot slightly to the right, while Bug Hunt appears to shoot slightly to the left, even with calibration. This caused some users of the XE-GS to rewire the Sega Master System light phaser for use with light gun games. In theory, this should work on your 7800 as well. There's not much information on if this issue also plagues the Atari 7800, but I'm not quite sure if that's due to the fact that not very many people use this accessory on the 7800, or if not very many people ran into this issue. We'll have to find out when we start trying out some games. So as I've noted, after the video game crash, Atari was being pulled in a bunch of different directions, even being split in half. This led to Atari supporting 3 different game consoles in the mid-1980s. There was Atari Corporation and Atari Games. Atari Games would make the Tengen titles for Nintendo and Sega Master System and even other game consoles, pretty much everything but Atari's consoles. Atari Corporation would make the game consoles and the hardware and the computers. They also contracted out some video game development themselves, but it just seems kind of crazy that they became 2 competing entities almost. And I don't know if that's a result of this, but because the hardware was made by the same company, they were able to make a game accessory that was compatible between 2 of their game systems. And I haven't been able to try it because I don't own the light gun for it, but this accessory may be compatible with the Atari 2600 as well. When you look at this accessory, it is not evident in its design that it is compatible with the Atari 7800. Its color scheme and design matches the Atari XE Game System. In fact, when you plug it into the Atari 7800, it doesn't look like it belongs. It looks like someone else's controller that you got to work on this console. But they definitely had this in mind when they made the light gun games for it. And speaking of the games, let's go ahead and take a look at them. As with many games ported to the Atari 7800, Crossbow was an arcade game that was released by Exidy in 1983. Absolute Entertainment published it for the Commodore 64 and MS-DOS, but even though they released some titles for the Atari 7800, this one was actually ported by Atari Corporation, making an appearance on both the Atari 7800 and the Atari 8-bit family, including the XEGS. The original arcade game actually offered a light gun in the style of a crossbow. However, in this version, you have to use the Atari XE light gun, which is in the shape of a pistol. The game begins by having the players shoot the screen, choosing a destination on the map. This game requires the player to protect a band of adventurers referred to as friends by the game. To do this, you have to shoot objects that threaten them from afar, basically acting like a sniper. The adventurers enter from the left-hand side of the screen and attempt to cross the screen unharmed. If the player helps them reach the opposite side of the screen safely, the adventurers survive to the next scenario, and new adventurers are occasionally granted between scenarios. In addition to obstacles, the adventurers are also vulnerable to the player's shots. The first time the player shoots an adventurer, an on-screen message is shown that says, "Don't shoot your friends." Thereafter, shooting an adventurer will cause him or her to emit a cry of pain, and walk at a slower pace the rest of the way. A second shot will kill the adventurer. The graphics and sound of this game seem to be on par with the rest of the Atari 7800's game library. Overall, while I did find this game enjoyable, keep in mind that it is mainly a shooting gallery game. My biggest criticism of this game is the one-hit kill when an enemy projectile hits one of the adventurers. This led to some incredibly frustrating gameplay in certain parts. This next game's intro, I think, is probably one of the best. Starting with an ominous alien hand floating across the screen, and then drawing out the word alien, seemingly in blood. They even make good use of the built-in sound chip of the unit, having a military-style theme play. Overall, a great way to get you hooked into the game. Moving on, Alien Brigade is a horizontally scrolling shooting gallery game released by Atari Corporation in 1990 for the Atari 7800. Similar in style to Operation Wolf, Alien Brigade tells the story of a soldier battling with alien invaders that take over the bodies of fallen soldiers. The game is played from a first-person point of view, and scrolls horizontally in two directions as various enemy creatures, possessed soldiers, human vehicles, and alien vehicles attack the player. Alien Brigade can be played with either a joystick or the Atari XE light gun. The game has 5 levels and 4 difficulty modes. The initial mission is to rescue hostages from an enemy camp, but eventually this game moves to a waterfront battle, underwater melee, and a showdown in an underground mine. Just like in Crossbow, the player must be careful not to shoot innocent bystanders. A couple of side notes about this game is that Alien Brigade is 144 kilobytes in size, making it one of the largest commercially released for the Atari 7800. Also, despite being released late into the Atari 7800's life cycle, Atari Corporation made more efforts to market this game than it had with any other Atari 7800 title. The game even had its own print advertisement, again something that was not common with other Atari 7800 games. Overall, I found this game to be incredibly fun, and even though it is just a shooting gallery game, I kept coming back to it because that gameplay style is something I found incredibly addicting. I would call this game the must-have if you have a 7800 and the light gun. When collecting Meltdown, I was actually able to find a complete in-box, still sealed version of this game. Normally I don't come across titles that are still sealed in its original box. I usually don't collect still sealed games, specifically because of what you're about to see here. While this may make some of you collectors cringe out there, my philosophy of game collecting is that these games were meant to be played, not meant to just be stored on a shelf. There is something satisfying, though, knowing that I am going to be the first person to play this game, even though it was produced over 30 years ago. Taking a look inside the box, we have the original game cartridge, the manual, and it looks like a warranty card. I think I'm a little too late to fill this out, though. Since I have the directions here, I am going to peruse the manual just a little bit. I like that their first direction is don't overreact. But anyway, let's get this cartridge loaded up and see what the game looks like. Meltdown is a light gun video game developed by Atari Corporation and published in 1990 for the Atari 7800. To give you some background, this game is set in a world where a gang of international terrorists have systematically set about destroying the world. They have sabotaged a number of nuclear reactors by unleashing a deadly string of sparks that will break down the protective control rods and make their way into the very core of each reactor. If this happens, the game will end with a meltdown. To play this game, you have to shoot at the sparks that appear on the screen. If you miss, instead, you will see a barrier pop up on the screen. This adds a layer of defensive play to the game, as sparks will bounce off of the barriers as long as they are on the screen. You can have up to 4 barriers on the screen, however you can earn more with additional power-ups. These barriers also give you a slight advantage visually, as it shows where your gun was pointed at the time you shot. However, this also does re-emphasize how inaccurate this light gun can be at times, as there were a few times where I was pointing at the same spot on the screen, but the barriers were appearing all around where I was actually shooting. And because the sparks are so small in this game, that became more of an issue, especially in the later, more difficult levels. There can be as many as 14 sparks on the screen at the same time. The player must shoot to destroy the sparks before they damage the reactor core. After a while, the screen will start shrinking, forcing you to act quickly to destroy the sparks. If you are successful in destroying all of the sparks before more appear on screen, bonus blocks will appear temporarily that act the same as barriers. If you survive to the end of the level, you are given a passcode allowing you to pick up exactly where you left off even if you power off the game. Again, this is something that was not common on the Atari 7800 and is very welcome. Overall, I didn't find this game as enjoyable as other games on this console. The graphics are certainly nothing to look at, and sometimes the gameplay is incredibly easy. Luckily, at the time I made this video, this game was not too expensive, so if you can find it, it may be worth it to get as a showpiece. When doing research on the background of this game, I actually was not able to find a lot of information about this game out there. Luckily, since my copy came with the game manual, that's where I got a lot of my information from. And since I figured that other people might also be looking for some of this same information, I decided to go ahead and create a Wikipedia page for this game, and thankfully it was approved before this video was published. So if you want to check that out, I'll leave a link in the description below, and if you guys have any additional information on this game, feel free to add it to the Wikipedia page. Alright, one more game to go, and this one is also brand new and sealed. So yeah, this is going to happen again. This time the game was a little stubborn and didn't want to come out. We again get a warranty card with it, as well as the manual, which this time is a bit more brief. I always appreciate that because that means this game is going to be pick up and play. Alright, let's go ahead and get this game loaded up, and we'll get it started. And first you're greeted with a kind of generic looking background screen with Old MacDonald Had a Farm playing with the TIA chip. After that's over with, you're given an option to play this game with 1 or 2 players. And at the first screen, I already noticed a problem. Trying to shoot at these bottles and cans just sitting on the fence line, I noticed that the calibration is slightly off. I couldn't always tell if it was being slightly to the right or slightly to the left, but sometimes it wouldn't even shoot at all despite me pulling the trigger, and I wasn't out of bullets yet. Overall, when this game does work, it's not very fun. The enemies and backgrounds are very generic, and I don't really feel any sense of satisfaction by defeating any of the enemies. Overall, I would probably call this game my least favorite of all of the Atari light gun games. After doing some research, I saw that several other people noted problems with this game, so I couldn't in all good conscience recommend this game. Again, this game was not specifically listed on Wikipedia, so I created a page for it as well. Alright, so what are my thoughts on the Atari light gun? First, I had a very enjoyable experience with this light gun. I don't think I ran into any issues getting it to work on any of the games. And speaking of the games I played on here, I actually appreciate the Atari 7800 being able to have multiple sprites on screen that don't have to flicker. That actually helped me out when I was trying to aim and know where to shoot on the screen. The graphics on these games I thought were some of the better on the system as well. The sounds were actually pretty good, even though I don't usually enjoy a lot of the sounds made out of this console, because there wasn't a lot of music that they tried to generate with that TIA chip inside of the console. I think I enjoyed it a little bit better because mainly what I'm looking for is bullet firing sound effects and death sound effects. If I had to pick a favorite out of the lot that I tried, I would say Alien Brigade is probably up there. I really like the game aesthetic, the sound effects were good, and I really think the gameplay reminds me of some of the later shooters, such as Lethal Enforcers, where you have to shoot the enemies, but avoid shooting the good guys. All that as the screen scrolls back and forth in an area for you to shoot. One of my nitpicks about this device is that I actually didn't know the Atari 7800 had a light gun. You know, this is called the Atari XE light gun that just happens to be compatible with the 7800. At least that's how it comes across when you're looking for games and you're looking for light guns for this console. And that could have led to why this accessory didn't sell well, because they had to market this as, oh yeah, this is an XE light gun, but it's also compatible with the 7800. And that just leads to a question. Who in the 1980s would own both? Keep in mind, back in the 1980s, some of us may have kept our Atari 2600, but a lot of us upgraded to the Nintendo Entertainment System, or the Sega Master System, or even the Atari 7800, and we ditched all of the old stuff. We didn't upgrade to more than one console. as I've grown up later on, I actually do own a PS4, a Switch, and an Xbox One. But back in the 80s, your parents would say, hey, you're getting one and you're going to like it, or you'll get none and like it. So it looks like this was purely a cost move to design one light gun that works across both of these consoles. But from the consumer end, it's actually a little bit more confusing because you're not going to own both. It's not going to save the consumer cost, it's just going to save cost on Atari's end. Now that said, do I feel this accessory is worth collecting today? Well, I've already mentioned this before, but let me reiterate. You have to own the original console, the light gun, track down the original games, and use these on a CRT television. And you have to have the space for the large, bulky CRT monitors, and its only function is going to be playing these older games. It's really not useful as a modern TV display. So if you already have one of those, or if you are willing to collect the CRT that goes with it, I would say, yeah, if you have an Atari 7800, this is an accessory that you'll want to collect with it. I had a lot of fun using the light gun on this console. So one thing I'm going to have to leave out of this review is the two-player option, and that's because I only own one of these light guns, so I couldn't tell you if any of these games are two-player, or how fun they would be if they are. But back in the 1980s, I was used to waiting my turn to play a game because I had 3 older brothers, so even if a game was two-player, we couldn't all play at the same time. But anyway, that's just my opinion. What do you guys think of this accessory? Are you one of the lucky few to use the Atari XE light gun on the 7800? Let me know in the comments below what your experiences were, and what you thought about this accessory.
But believe it or not, we're still not done with this accessory. We actually have one more game to cover, and that is actually a game for the Atari 2600. That's right, next week we're going to take a look at Sentinel for the Atari 2600. It is the only light gun game released for the Atari 2600, and the last game released for that system as well. Join us next week as we take a look. If you like this video and you'd like to help out with future projects on this channel, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Also, if you enjoy the content of this channel, please remember to click on this subscribe button. Again, I want to thank you guys so much for watching. If you'd like to see some of the content I've already done, feel free to click on some of the suggestions that are popping up on your screen. Otherwise, I'll see you next time.